get this off on good form, I'd invite Professor Penny Fielding to come to the podium. Thank you.
So this little talk stems from a book that I'm writing about spy fiction in Scotland, from Walter Scott to Muriel Spark. So this is just a little rehearsal of some parts of chapter 1. Redgauntlet, even superficially, reads like a spy novel. Let me give you some examples. Characters appear under code names: Greenmantle, Rugged and Dangerous, Craig in Peril, Mr. Herries, Father Bonaventure. Letters are intercepted and opened. The plot concerns a conspiracy against the government, but the conspirators believe there was a government spy at the highest level, and Clementina Walkinshaw, the prince's mistress, is suspected of being a Hanoverian agent. In the heated environment of suspicion, Darcy Latimer is accused of being a spy simply because he is a stranger. Crystal Nixon is a double agent, despised by both sides and condemned as a traitor by even his employers. Government spies did infiltrate Jacobites during and after the 1745 Rising, and Scott is generally quite knowledgeable about the way in which they operated. But in my book, I'm thinking about Scott's novels in a different way. Redgauntlet looks back not only at the Jacobite period, but also at its own recent past. So I'm going to talk here about how the novel is receptive to the period from 1815, leading up to its publication in 1824. Now, as many of you will know, the end of the Napoleonic Wars in 1815 ushered in some very troubled times in Britain. The combination of an economic depression and the protectionist Corn Laws made life for working people very difficult and gave rise to radical movements. These were predominant in concentrations of weaving communities in the north of England and the west of Scotland, and radical societies and incipient trades unions were the target of government spies and agents provocateurs trying to maintain state control of these radical movements. Redgauntlet has a sense of a country that has recently come to the end of open conflict. Darcy, who is always one step behind the political intrigue that he's caught up in, Darcy believes that the conclusion of the 7 Years' War has led to a period of national stability. He thinks that, quote, France has been utterly dismayed by the tremendous lessons of the last war and will hardly provoke another. But at the same time, we seem to be heading from the end of the hot war with France to a kind of Cold War of suspicion and clandestine activities. Here, Darcy notes in his journal a growing sense of unease within the nation. There have been rumours lately, he writes, as if the present state of the nation, or at least some discontented provinces, agitated by a variety of causes, but particularly by the unpopularity of the present administration, may seem to this species of agitator a favourable period for recommencing their intrigues. So we have an unpopular administration, covert rumours, agitators, and intrigue. This is a state of affairs that could apply equally to 1760s Scotland, where the novel is set, and post-1815 Britain as a whole. In response to radical dissent and unrest among the weaving communities, Lord Liverpool, the Prime Minister, and his much disliked Home Secretary, Lord Sidmouth, reinforced their network of spies and informers to gain advanced knowledge of radical protest and possible uprisings. Habeas corpus was suspended in 1817 to allow imprisonment without trial, and a wave of protest swept over the Whig press, who were obviously more sympathetic to the radicals. Here is an extract from the newly founded Scotsman newspaper, expressing the fear that the whole of society would become corrupted by the ubiquity of spies. This is from 1817. But does not the mere acknowledgement of employing spies generate a feeling of distrust and insecurity? This may be limited at first, but in the end it will spread throughout the whole of society. Spies will be afraid of each other. Every man will fear his neighbour, and thus a rank crop of the most malignant and destructive passions will be brought to maturity. Redgauntlet, the novel, has a pervasive sense that under the surface of society, secretive forces are at work. And I'm going to read out a conversation between Darcy and Crystal Nixon, who's one of Redgauntlet's henchmen, who is, as we've seen, a double agent. This is about what might happen to Darcy if he rejects his uncle's demands to join the rebellion. So Crystal Nixon says, there are sharp laws in France. Lettres de cachet are easily come by. You can be imprisoned without trial with the seal, technically, of the king. In practice, one of his secretaries. So lettres de cachet are easily come by when such men as we are concerned with interest themselves in this matter. And Darcy, as he often says, but we are not in France, says poor Darcy, through whose blood ran a cold shivering at the idea of prison. And Crystal says, a fast-sailing lugger will soon bring you there, though, snug stowed under hatches like a cask of moonlight. Darcy protests, oh, the French are at peace with us, but a public peace treaty here is only weakly set against the secretive power of the notorious lettres de cachet, which had been used in France to imprison a subject without trial. These predicaments are common in Gothic novels, but Scott does something different in his novel of Espionage, where conspiracy can meet counter-conspiracy. And Alan Fairfoot is given a kind of lettre de cachet, a sealed letter from one of the Jacobite plotters to another, advising his own detention. If you read this, arrest the person who's holding it. And he eventually decides to open it on the grounds that, he says, if these correspondents are conspiring against my person, I have a right to counterplot them. Self-preservation, as well as my friend's safety, require that I should not be too scrupulous. So in Redgauntlet's world of mutual suspicion, Alan concludes that it might be in his own interests to act like a spy himself. So in a novel filled with secret agency, Redgauntlet clearly reflects the years after 1815, but it also reflects its own immediate present in 1824. That year turned out to be full of reflections on the spy scandals of recent years. James Hogg's Confessions of a Justified Sinner is also full of spies. And that year saw the publication of an autobiographical account by an actual spy, Alexander Richmond. Richmond said he wasn't a spy, but he was. Even though the most visible plots, insurrections, and accompanying spy scandals of the post-war years diminished somewhat after 1820, the nature of espionage is that it's not generally made public at the time. And in fact, Robert Peel, as Home Secretary from 1822, was using informers to report on any radical activity. This later turns into spying on the Chartists. But in any case, the nature of secret political culture is that the public sphere is invaded by doubts and uncertainties. Perhaps Jacobites might be secretly plotting in 1765 and radical conspirators in 1824 without this being public knowledge. As a historical novel, Redgauntlet concerns itself as much with what cannot be known as what can be known. And this is my final point. Secret agents may be secret because they do not themselves know everything about the origins or the effects of that agency. This is very common in 20th and 21st century spy novels, for example, by John le Carré. So they may not know what's going on. And Darcy takes a long time to realize that he is, in fact, a key asset in a political conspiracy. If we think about the difference between a spy novel and a detective novel, we can see that detectives are in a position to tell us what happens. In the classic narrative form of a detective novel, the detective wraps everything up to tell us who the criminal is and how the criminal done it. And we think of Holmes explaining everything to Watson, to Watson's Mason. But spy novels are not like this. They're about the difficulty they're about how difficult it is to know what's going on, how difficult it is to read history, and that we may not really ever know what happened. Redgauntlet is, after all, about a Jacobite rising that didn't happen, as far as we know. Thank you.